Hi, I'm Edwin Rutch, Director of the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy. And this video is the first session of our 7-week course on defining empathy that we're working on developing that right now. And this is the first draft of the prototype. And our team is working on this 7-week course and just going through each lesson kind of one at a time and doing kind of draft versions of it. And the plan is, as we go through it the first time, it'll be kind of quite rough. And then we go through it a second time and refine it. And we go through it, 2 or 3 times. And hopefully we have a, refined course ready that we can have participants attend, others attend it. So I'm going to go and do this slideshow here. It's a slideshow that I'm going to show you. And we're just going to go through it step by step. And this is it. The course is called Defining Empathy, a Way of Being for a Better World. And this is module 2, which is a 7-week training. And this is 7.1, an overview and outline of it. And this is the very first version. So do, take any notes and suggestions for improving it, and I'll work those into the next version of it. So let's go to the session outline. The session outline is the same as we do in module 1 of the Empathy Circle Facilitator training. And this is, like I mentioned, module 2. And we do plan on doing other modules as well. So there'll be other topics for doing a whole series of trainings. But this is the session 1 outline. We start off with a full group of about 30 minutes. We then do breakout rooms for about an hour and a half. And then we have a full group debrief. And our full group, we get together. This is the first session. We get together. The trainer welcomes everyone. They introduce themselves. They share why they're interested in this defining empathy and in this course. And then we go on to the participant intros, and that's maybe about 15 minutes, 1 minute per person. And we hear from each of the attendees, why are you interested in defining empathy and taking this course? And then we go to the course of, don't want to do that. I want to click on it. So we go to the course objectives, and then we go review the arc of the 7-week course, and we will then have a presentation. And then there'll be a description of the breakout rooms, and that's the first half hour. I'm going to go into depth on each of these first. So let's just start with the course objectives. So we're first, the course objectives are learn the empathy as a way of being definition model. And so that's for each person to be able to just understand what how that model works and looks like. And then 2 is to develop a deeper experiential understanding of the definition and meaning of empathy. So it's experiential. So you really experience the different aspects or facets of this model. And then you learn how to map the model onto your experience in the empathy circle. And then you experience, understand some blocks to empathy, and then be able to evaluate, number 5, be able to evaluate and understand how people are using the word empathy in conversations, articles, books, etc. So let's actually move this. Yeah, okay, get that out of the way. So let's see, we have the arc of the course. So lesson 1, which is what this is empathy, a way of being model. So we share an overview of this model, and then we explore the different facets of it. And we get an overview of how the facets of the model are expressed in the empathy circle. And then we have some activities, and we'll be doing an empathy circle to hear from participants, what your definition of empathy is and how it maps onto the empathy circle. Then lesson 2 is, zooming in on the facet of other-oriented empathy. We review the facet and how we really empathize with others. And then we talk about it, we get a sense of it in the empathy circle. And this is actually the typical understanding of what people think of when they think of empathy as this other-oriented empathy. And we'll have some activities in the breakout rooms to explore this. The next one is self-empathy. We review the facet of how we empathize with ourselves, and we'll have some activities and exercises to explore that. Then we have imaginative empathy, and this is how we use our imagination to feel and sense into our experience. And then we'll have activities to explore that. And then lesson 5 is relational empathy, and we review the quality. We look at empathy in relationships of people, like when people are coming together, what is the quality of empathy in those relationships? Usually empathy is defined as this individualistic focus, one person empathizing with someone else. And what we're going to look at here is sort of expand that to the quality of mutual empathy in relationships. And then we'll also have some activities to, explore that. And then number 6, we have the blocks to empathy, and we'll look at some of the many blocks or ways that empathy can be blocked. And again, we'll have some interesting exercises to really explore those blocks and really experience them. And then we have other definition models. That's lesson 7. We're going to compare and contrast the empathy as a way of being model and with other models out there. And one of them is going to be the affective cognitive empathy model, which is quite popular. So we're going to compare the two, and we'll have some exercises as well for exploring that experientially. Okay, so this is the beginning of the presentation. So we're going to explain the empathy as a way of being model and give a short review of the different facets of this model. And I'm going to be showing the full presentation now, but in the training itself, we're going to have just a little bit of an outline of it. And we're going to have a video of the full presentation that participants can watch beforehand, because we really want to spend as much time in the training as possible for experiential experiencing and versus sort of, didactic and informational. So we'll try to put the informational part into a separate video that people can watch on their own before the session starts. Do it at home at the comfort of whenever you have time to look at it. So let's start with what we have or at least I see as a problem, and so did Barack Obama. He laid out I think expressed it well, the current problem in society. And he says, it seems like we got an empathy shortage and empathy deficit more serious than the federal budget deficit. We've become so cynical that it almost seems naive to believe that we can understand each other across the gulf of race or class or region or religion. So this is when he was running for office, and he kind of mentioned this is the problem. And we do need more empathy in society, at least what I feel. And actually, since Obama was president, things have actually gotten worse. And so I think we really need to raise the level of empathy and we're going to need a movement to do that. And to have a movement, we're going to need a clear definition of at least what we mean by it. You know, you never get everybody on board to agree on one definition, but you can at least express what we're meaning by it. And let's go to the next slide here. And what do we mean by empathy? And it's confusing because there's really a lot of definitions. It's kind of relatively inconsistent how people are using the word. You know, people talk about affective empathy, cognitive empathy, empathic distress, theory of mind, you know, relational empathy, emotional contagion, perspective taking. You know, it's kind of all over the place, all these different terms. And so we want to lay out at least how we're defining empathy, and I think it's a pretty good effective model that that we're going to be showing. So let's start. You know, go back to the beginning of when the word and the concept was more or less, you know, initially coined. And it was around the 1870s. There was a German philosopher on aesthetics, a guy named Robert Fischer. He wanted to describe how feelings arise when you look at a work of art. And, you know, if you look at a work of art, like if you look at this one, this painting here on the screen, that you sort of feel into it, and different feelings arise as you feel into it. And so he wanted to describe that phenomenon, and he used the German word Einfühlung, which means, you know, Ein means in, and Fühlung means feeling. So he's describing the experience of feeling into a work of art. And this painting is called a Studio at Les Batignolles, I don't know how to pronounce that, by Henry Fatin Latour. And it was painted in the 1870s, which is around the time that Wissner, coined the term. And here you can see the artists are looking into a work of art, and they're feeling their way into it. And the German word was later translated to empathy, which is, you know, Greek terms. Em is in, and pathy or pathos is feeling. So it was later translated. So at least this is sort of generally accepted where the word sort of first was sort of coined. And then, you know, how did the word and concept evolve from its first use in Germany, you know, to the present? And it's the meaning of the word is really evolved. You know, a lot of people have defined it, redefined it, different disciplines, you know, academic disciplines define it differently. And so it's really gone through a long sort of a evolution of the term. And I'm not going to go into it in real depth, but refer you to this book on the topic, Empathy, A History by Susan Lanzoni. And I've interviewed Susan about the history of the word. And she's also done some really great presentations, you know, videos, slideshows. And there'll be a link to those in the chat down below. And so you can really just, you know, check that book out, watch those videos, and it'll give you kind of a history of how the word moved, you know, evolved to the present. But in basic, the word migrated from the word Einfühlung in art aesthetics. It started to be used in psychology to describe the experience of feeling into other people's. And it was then translated in English as empathy. And the word, you know, changed in definitions and was refined over and over again. And it's still, you know, there's a lot of different definitions now. But the thing is we're going to look at the definition. Our starting point is the definition that starts with the work of Carl Rogers. So we're really basing it on his work as sort of the foundation of the definition that we're going to be exploring here. And he lived from 1902 to 1987. And he's considered one of the top 2 or 3 most influential clinical psychologists in history. And he started talking about empathy in the 1950s, 60s, 70s until his death in 87. So it's like, yeah, like over 40 years, he really was sort of exploring this topic. And he also was the developer of the active listening process in therapy, which was, and also used it in couples counseling and group work and conflict mediation. And his active listening or empathic listening process is the basis of the empathy circle practice. So in his work in humanist psychology, empathy became one of the core concepts of his work and theories. And I really find his work very useful and unique in that he combined experiential empathy, so the practice, the doing of empathy, with scientific and theoretical inquiry, which I think is just a very powerful sort of approach. So he wasn't just a theorist, dealing with abstract concepts, but really had decades of that hands-on experiential practice. And as a therapist, he listened to, I imagine he just listened to thousands of people, in his career, using the empathic listening process. Yeah, and actually, I would say also I find that a lot of the confusion with the meaning of empathy in academia just comes that a lot of the academics are sort of clinical, not clinical, but cognitive scientists, that they work at more of an abstract level, and I think that can lead to a lot of confusion if you don't have the hands-on practical experience with empathy like Rogers did. So he's I just find him a really great foundation for what we're doing. Okay, so in 1975, Carl Rogers wrote a paper on empathy entitled Empathic and Unappreciated Way of Being. And he consolidated a lot of his understanding of empathy within the context of being a therapist into this paper. And here's a quote he has on empathy from that paper. He says, "An empathic way of being with another person has several facets. It means entering the private perceptual world of the other and becoming thoroughly at home in it. It involves being sensitive moment by moment to the changing felt meanings which flow in the other person, to the fear or rage or tenderness or confusion or whatever he or she is experiencing." So here he's really referencing empathy as a way of being that has a lot of different facets and parts to it. And he's describing it as really being with someone and sensing into their experience. And this is the starting point, foundation of the definition that we're going to be exploring here. This empathy is a multifaceted way of being, and that this course is based on. And so maybe going a little bit more depth, we're going to kind of have his foundational statements on empathy be the foundation, and we'll be expanding on it. And so the basic definition that we have here is empathy is a way of being in relationship with life. It is feeling, sensing into life with presence, deep listening, openness, a sense of self, curiosity, and care. So I know it's a lot of terms there, but it really, I think, captures that way of being. And it is being sensitive to felt experiences and meanings in oneself, others, relationships, and in our common humanity. And this way of being, I would say, compares, for example, to ways of being that are maybe judgmental, indifferent, detached, domineering, cynical, overly analytical or self-centered. So these are, people that have these basic personality types and that maybe block empathy. So, and like a diamond, this way of being is multifaceted. And we're going to be using the metaphor or analogy of this way of being is like a diamond. That like a diamond, this way of being has a lot of facets. It's one thing, but you can look at the different facets of it. And that's what we're going to be looking at is some of the different facets. There is then what is a way of being? And that's something we probably should define too, is what do we mean here by a way of being? And for me, it's the wholeness of who we are, kind of the essential nature, essence, spirit. It's made up of the kind of the deep set of values and attitudes of who we are. And I think this, just a way of being is still something we need to maybe define a bit more. But I think that's a good starting point. So what are some of the facets of an empathy as a way of being? So we're kind of breaking it down here to look at these different facets. So the first one is other-oriented empathy, and that's feeling, sensing into others. There's self-empathy is feeling, sensing into oneself. There's imaginative empathy, which is feeling, sensing through our imagination. And we have relational empathy and awareness of the quality of mutual empathy in a relationship. And with this model, just like a diamond, it has multiple facets, and there's, kind of never-ending facets that we can kind of add to this, kind of going into greater depth. But this is kind of the starting point. And another aspect I want to share here is that we want to demonstrate the definition of in the experience of the empathy circle. So we're going to be defining empathy as, this empathic way of being, but ground it, those roots of the definition go into the empathy circle itself. And so that we can point out in the empathy circle, each of the aspects or facets that we're talking about. And that's just a way of sort of grounding it, in more practical experience, just our lived experience. So you can really feel what the different facets feel like. And then next we have the empathy circle is based on the work developed by Rogers, the active listening process. And this is Rogers. There's some videos of him doing modeling listening, empathic listening out on the internet. And these are just some still shots from 3 of them. So he would just listen empathically using active listening to, his clients for, maybe up to an hour or so doing the therapeutic sessions. And then he also did sort of expand on this kind of in his later work. He started talking about using this in schools and work, society, and he did conflict resolution work as well using active listening. So let's review how to do the empathy circle, because we do want to ground this work in the empathy circle. And everyone taking this course should be familiar with the practice, but we'll just quickly review it. So in the empathy circle, there's 2 to 7 participants, with 4 being an ideal number. There's different roles. There's a speaker, there's an active listener, and there's silent listeners. And then there might also be a facilitator who is participant, but also kind of just keeps the process on track. And in this process, the speaker selects who they're going to speak to, and they become the active listener, and then the speaker shares an idea or two, and then the active listener reflects back what they're hearing, and we have timed turns for that. And that's very similar to what Rogers did. He was the active listener, and he would just spend the full 50 minutes or an hour listening to the speaker and reflecting back. And what we do is we modify that, where we do turn taking. The speaker has maybe 5 minutes. The active listener listens, reflects back, and then until the speaker feels heard or their time is up. And then, let's see, then once the time is up or the speaker feels fully heard, then the active listener becomes the speaker, and they select an active listener and they speak to them for the time until their time is up. And then that person becomes the new speaker and they select their active listener, and the circle goes on like that for the overall time allotted. So let's take a look at facet 1, empathy, other-oriented empathy. And that is feeling, sensing into the other. And we're going to do a little bit deeper dive on this. And again, that empathizing with others is what Rogers did. Just repeating that here. And then this is a picture, Mother and Child by Mary Cassatt, which I really like. Is here we can just imagine that the mother is listening to the child and empathizing with the child. They're probably not doing reflective listening, but really listening deeply to the child, and you can sort of feel the intimacy and care in this image. And then maybe the child is just telling about her day or something going on in her life, and the mother is listening to her. And so empathizing, sensing into the daughter's experience. And when she's sensing into her daughter, she's reading the emotions that the daughter has, just like we do in the empathy circle, right? That maybe the child is happy, sad, angry, excited. There's all these different feelings that come up. And when you're empathizing, you're sensing into all those different feelings. And this is the same, right? The speaker is speaking, the active listener is sensing into the experience of the speaker. In this case, the speaker has a smile on her face, seems to be feeling good, feeling happy. So it's that quality of sensing into the other. And also the silent listeners, they're also empathizing, maybe not as intensely, but they are listening to the speaker silently. So they're like non-verbally, silently empathizing with the speaker. Okay, and then let's do a test of your empathy circle. I just wanted to show you this, that we set up our empathy tent, out in public spaces. And one of the things we do is we test people's empathy, and you can see on the right there is a sign that says, how empathic are you? And this is a test where people can kind of read the emotions in these eyes. And this is from the Autism Research Center at the University of Cambridge. It's called the Reading the Mind in the Eyes test. So I thought we just to deepen this experience, maybe do a few of these examples where, as a listener, you're listening to someone, and it's like, you're sort of picking up on their feelings. And, here, if you look at this person's eyes, which of these four feelings do you think that they're feeling at the moment? And is it hateful? Is it jealous? Is it arrogant? Is it panicked? And the it's actually, they say it's panicked, which I'd agree with. It looks like he's kind of has some fear, anxiety there in his eyes. And then here's another one: is what describes this person? Is she playful, comforting, irritated, or bored? What's your thought on that? What would you select if you're looking into those eyes? And the answer that they have is playful, which seems like that's what I would choose. And here's another one: are they those eyes convincing? Are they joking? Is it desire or is it bored? And they say desire. I mean, that's what I would think too. Uh, and so you're sensing, right? We're sensing into these eyes and reading, sort of empathizing with this person, sort of reading, who they are. And here's another one from the Greater Good Science Center. They created a test like this as well. And is this person feeling surprised, interested, happy, or in pain? And they say it's surprise, which, that's usually you're surprised. You got the wide open eyes. So that's sort of empathizing with her. And then we have from the Greater Good Science Center again, another one: is this person sad? Are they in pain? Are they, feeling anger, or they're feeling disgust? And I think it's anger, and that's what they say as well. And so those are just some examples of, reading the emotions of someone, sensing into, empathizing with them. I thought I would just do another test here that we can sort of feel into when someone has an emotion. Like we can feel the yawn, and it kind of grows, and you can maybe feel it growing and expanding inside of you. And so if you start looking at it, more pictures of people yawning, I'm starting to feel myself starting to yawn now, right? And there's another one yawning, and it's like, after a while, it's like hard not to yawn when you see this. And that's kind of starting with empathy. You're sensing into them, you're sort of feeling that yawn, and then it starts growing into you, in you, and then you start yawning. So that's a bit more like emotional contagion. So it starts with the empathy, and we'll be talking more about emotional contagion and later on, but it sort of starts with that sensing into and sensing the feelings of the other. So then let's go on to facet number 2: self-empathy, feelings, sensing into self. And we're going to go back to another quote by Carl Rogers, since he's really the foundation, like I say, of this definition. So he says, being listened to by someone who understands makes it possible for persons to listen more accurately to themselves, with greater empathy towards their own visceral experiencing, their own vaguely felt meanings. So what he's saying here is that when we're heard by other people, we actually feel into our own experience. And he didn't really use the word self-empathy, but that's the word we're going to use for it, that you're empathizing, feeling, sensing into your own, visceral, bodily, felt, somatic, whatever word you want to use, feelings. And here is the mother listening to the child with empathy, listening to the child. And the idea here is that the child, by being able to tell, her stories and her experiences maybe of the day, she's able to feel into the meanings of those experiences and empathizing with herself. So that quality of being listened to by someone else helps you to actually empathize with yourself. And here's pictures of kids, they have different, they're expressing different feelings. So if you feel inside yourself, you can feel, do I feel calm? Do I feel relaxed? Do I feel happy? Do I feel nervous? And all these different feelings you can sense into those feelings. And we're calling that self-empathy, sensing into your own bodily experiences. Then, self-empathy is you don't have to be with other people to sense into your body. You can just be sitting quietly somewhere, out on the lawn, like this little girl here is just sitting there kind of sensing into her own uh, bodily sensations, and that's what we're calling self-empathy. And then also we can look at self-empathy in the empathy circle, because we want to, like I said, we really want to ground the experience in what we're experiencing in the empathy circle. And so the speaker, I got the little green arrow there for showing self-empathy, is that the speaker, by being listened to by the active listener, they get to explore their inner ideas, thoughts, meanings, feelings, and that's sort of that process of self-empathy. And at one level or another, everybody is sort of feeling into their own, that their own self. But the speaker tends to have more of it because they're sort of the focus of attention. It's kind of a deeper self-empathy for the speaker. Okay, so then that's the next one we're going to facet we're going to look at is imaginative empathy. And this is another facet of this empathic way of being. And let's go into what is self-empathy, or what is imaginative empathy. And imaginative empathy is that we can take on roles or imagine ourselves in other situations. So, for example, with imaginative empathy is maybe this little girl is telling her mother a dream that she had. Like she imagined herself in this dream, and she felt into the dream, and maybe there was some fear, it was a nightmare, or something really lovely happened. So she imagined herself maybe flying, and she's sharing that experience. We're just imagining that's what she's doing, telling her mother that experience, and she's sharing her imagination. Or maybe she's imagining when she grows up, she wants to be a doctor and she wants to really help people, and she's imagining being a doctor and kind of sharing her wishes for that, or just anything. So, or maybe she wants to be an actress, like Meryl Streep, and take on roles with, or maybe she did an acting in her class or something. She's talking about that. So, how does imaginative empathy, fit into the empathy circle? We don't really haven't focused so much on imaginative empathy in the empathy circle. It's not like a big part, but it certainly can be. For example, in a circle, we had a speaker. We were talking about creativity, and the speaker talked about. They talked about that when they had creative ideas, judgment would come up, and they would criticize. She'd criticize her own creative ideas, which caused pain, and then she didn't want to have any creativity. So we said, okay, well, let's do a role-playing process. And then she took on creativity, the role of creativity. Somebody else took on the role of being judgment, and somebody else took on the role of pain, and somebody else could have taken on the role of something else. And then they had the different parts had an empathic dialogue with each other. So creativity, it's like, hey, I'm creativity. I'd like to speak to my judgment. And they're sharing something like, I really enjoy my creativity. It feels, fun and energizing. And then judgment would reflect back what creativity had said. And then it would, until the time was up for creativities, creativity felt heard. to their satisfaction. And then judgment would speak to maybe pain, saying, yeah, I really, like to judge people or whatever. And pain would reflect back what it was hearing. So we had this scenario where we were role playing these different feelings that this one person was having. And it turned out to be really quite a profound experience, because the person who was having these experiences could see the different parts of themselves in dialogue, working through these issues. And it all kind of started by just doing some role playing. So you can do a lot of different scenarios like this in the circle. You could, role play a family dynamic. Maybe you got some conflict in the family. Different people take on the family dynamics. One person be the father, one the mother, one the kids, or whatever. And you can sort of role play it and see what comes up. And it could be a workplace scenario, or just kind of like any type of a scenario like that. And next, let's look at, I'd mentioned Meryl Streep, and we can feel into any role in any perspective. And Meryl Streep, I love her acting. She says, I've thought a lot about the power of empathy in my work. It's the current that connects me and my actual pulse to a fictional character in a made-up story. It allows me to feel, pretend feelings, sorrows, and imagine pain. And so this is her taking on the role of Margaret Thatcher and Julia Childs. And she just really embodies the person. And she's calling that empathy, and I would say it's an imaginative empathy. It's a role taking, a perspective taking. And then another example of imaginative empathy is this designer, human-centered designer, Patricia Moore. She did some role playing where she dressed up when she was young, like in her 20s or something, but she dressed up as an elderly person in their 80s or 90s or whatever. And she put on glasses that were, foggy, so she couldn't see well. She had different props, different things that really inhibited her range of motion. So really sort of role playing and really embodying the limitations that you maybe have when you're elderly. And she was a designer, meaning designers are creating products and services, for people. And she was able to develop products that were actually more useful for the elderly because she'd had that experience. So she's credited with creating those, thick handles on potato peelers, etc., that would be easier for someone with maybe, limitations on grasping to be able to grasp. And she was able to have that, that creativity and implement that through her empathy, through role playing. So those are just a couple of examples of role playing or imaginative empathy. So let's move on. So the next facet we want to look at is empathic way of being. Another facet is relational empathy. And this is going to be covered in session 5 of the training. And we start with, usually empathy is defined kind of from an individualistic point of view. It's like the empathizer is listening to the speaker. And everything, the definitions are all sort of around this. This one person is empathizing with the world, people in the world, and you got to get better at your empathy. And it's just seen as you as this individual and what your level of empathy is. But when we're talking about relational empathy, we're looking at the relationship, the nature and quality of the relationship between, in this case, two people. Like how is a level of mutual empathy in the relationship? It's just not, one person empathizing. It's the relationship and the quality of the relationship and the level of that empathy. And, again, we have relational empathy. here's the mother and daughter, they're mutually empathizing with each other. They seem very relaxed, very calm, very intimate. And it seems like it's a high level of empathy between the two of them. And you can just sort of sense that by looking at both of them and see the wholeness of the relationship, and have that sense. Versus, let's say, maybe low relational empathy, two people in conflict, and like this looks kid's got his tongue sticking out, the other person is pointing at them, and seems like they got conflict with each other and aren't really empathizing, and maybe it's a low level of empathy. They really need some practice with listening to each other, some active listening. And in the same with the relational empathy and the empathy circle, it's a lot of different arrows here. Looks a little bit confusing, but each person is empathizing with their self. So we got the little down arrows there, and then everybody is empathizing with everyone else. And there's just a lot of different types of empathy going on here. And there's the wholeness of the group. Is what is the level of empathy in the whole group, and can we really address that? And generally, the empathy circle does create sort of a group quality, a relational quality of empathy, because everyone is feeling heard. There's trust developing. There's greater openness, more presence, people are present, and a sense of care sort of develops. So the overall way of being of the whole group, and the level of empathy in it. And our goal in the training is really to create a whole world, relational empathy, to really raise the level of empathy in the whole world. And we got wars, we got famines, we got just all kinds of political polarization. And it's the level to raise the level of empathy means to look at the whole of what's happening, on the planet with sort of this empathy deficit, and see what we can do to really raise that level of empathy, between all people. And there are other facets, we're not going to go into these other facets, but they might be other lessons, sessions at other times, because you can always just keep looking. Like this diamond here, it's got so many different facets. We're only looking at a few of them, and you can always find and explore other facets of it. So want to have it be that sort of that open kind of a way of being, looking at the different qualities of that way of being, and sort of be open to look at other facets as well. So then another thing we'll do in session 6, we're going to be reviewing the blocks to empathy. So there are things that sort of ways of being or values or attitudes that block empathy. And it can be judgment, for one, is a big one. It can be sympathy, feeling sorry for people instead of just empathizing, listening to them. You just kind of go into your own world and start feeling sorry for people, which can block empathy. It can be detachment, like, people just don't want to talk to each other. They just detach and don't engage with each other. And so we'll be looking at those and a bunch of other blocks to empathy. We'll have a whole session 6 on those blocks. Then we'll go into contrasting other definition models of empathy, and that's actually session 7. Should add that sessions to the slide. So we're going to look at the way of being model, call it the diamond model, way of being model, and compare it to the affective cognitive empathy model. For one, there's a lot of different models for empathy, and this is one of them that's sort of popular. And so we're going to compare the way of being with that cognitive affective model. And we'll see how much time we have. We'll probably go into other ones, other models as well. So that was that was just the presentation, and And like I said, we have just a short version in the first 30 minutes. We'll probably just do 10 minutes instead of what's here is about almost 45 minutes. And then we'll have a description of the breakout room, and we'll explain the breakout room, and we'll go into a breakout room, and we'll have maybe an hour and a half or so in the breakout room, and the topic is going to be, how do you personally define empathy, and how does your definition map onto the experience of the empathy circle? And so we really want to have everyone bring their definition to the table here, and hear what your definition is, so that we can kind of, so we can compare it or connect it with the way of being model, and for you to say, how does your definition map onto the experience in the empathy circle, right? It's like, if you have a definition of empathy, where do you see your definition playing out within the empathy circle? And that's, just repeating, just repeating the question here. So we'll have an empathy circle breakout room and discuss that. And then, once that time is up, we're going to go into the full room, have a full group debrief for about 30 minutes. We'll start off with maybe about 25 minutes where each person shares any learnings and insight from the empathy circle. And then we'll also maybe have some time, depending on how many people in the group, for a little bit more extended discussions, maybe questions and answers, something like that. And then we're going to go into the closing. We'll have 5 minutes for the closing. And it's kind of our standard closing from Module 1. We do the same thing. We hear any final trainer comments. We review what we did in the session. We review what we're going to do next week. We mention this week's assignments. And then we do a final jazz hands goodbye. And the assignments will be emailed out, and we'll have a feedback form, and that you can fill out, kind of also add any questions in the feedback form to be answered next week. We'll we'll have empathy buddy calls, so we'll send out the empathy buddy pairings, and you have your calls with your buddy. We'll have different calls. You'll meet with different people during the week, just so you get each week, so you are able to connect with others in the cohort. And then for next week, it will be, we'll have 2 articles to read by Carl Rogers, Empathic and Unappreciated Way of Being and Active Listening. And so next week is Other-Oriented Empathy, and we'll be discussing that there. So that's it. I guess that's it for now. And do send me an email, any feedback on this. This is like just the first rough prototype draft of this presentation. Hope to get it much more refined for future. I want to get it refined for more future editions. So look forward to seeing you in the training.